Good afternoon in Stockholm, and good afternoon for those following us online, or good morning, or good evening. My name is Tom Dyer from Antea Group in Belgium, the International Water and Climate Lead. I will be your host for this session this afternoon. Some of you may have followed our session on nature-based solutions for urban resilience, which we've had earlier this week. Today we're continuing on the subject, we continue the conversation, but we're zooming in particularly on coastal cities which have extra challenges, extra opportunities as well. Historically, coastal cities have been the most attractive places to develop settlements due to the rich biodiversity and extraordinary natural resources. And coastal cities are also the gateways of trade and transport for countries and sites of key economic blue activity. And infrastructure including ports, airports, hotels, fish markets. But these sectors do not necessarily exist in harmony, and competing demands must be managed. Coastal cities are also sites of significant population growth, much of which is unplanned and vulnerable to climate-induced hazards. Almost half of the world's population nowadays lives in coastal areas, and many of these are among the most vulnerable communities on the planet. So, before going into the program, we'll have 6 short presentations for you today with 6 inspiring experts. And we'll follow this by a panel debate in which we'll also give you the opportunity to interact with our panel members. And we would like to start to kick off with a Mentimeter question, because we would like to know who's in the room and who's following us online, and more particularly, where do you come from? It's very interesting to know who we speak to, because the issues we're dealing with in coastal areas in the north and the south may somehow be similar, but do have their own challenges. So, as we're starting, I see some names, some countries already appearing on the screen. People from the US, from Europe, from Argentina, Kenya, Denmark, Norway, Brazil, Poland. Let us know where you come from. Slovakia, Paris, India, Germany. I think most of the countries that are there are effectively coastal countries or have coastal areas. That's already interesting. Canada. So we have people from north, from south, from Africa, from Asia. That's a nice mix, and that will certainly enrich also the conversation. Let me switch back to our presentation, and let me kindly invite the first speaker of this afternoon. Dr. Alberto Innocenti is Associate Professor in Urban Resilience and Deputy Coordinator of the UNESCO Chair of Urban Resilience at the University of Southern Denmark. He holds a PhD degree in Agriculture, Cities and Design. His main area of focus is on coastal systems to face complex social, economic, and climate challenges and extreme events. Since 2019, he has been a senior expert for the EU, international cooperation, urban cooperation, Asia and Pacific. Alberto, the floor is yours. You can use the clicker.
So I probably will continue. I will keep framing what is the Lency continuum, because was the other. Because when we talk about the Lency continuum, we talk about how we develop and how we exploit all the natural elements, natural habitat on coastal areas. We can see that we are shaping our cities on coast in many ways, and many times we are exploiting natural habitats. So, or we are even, as you can see here, for example, doing land reclamation, or we are just using as till the least piece of land for agriculture. Or in many cases, with the blue economy and the use of the sea, sometimes we are exploiting the sea with the sea farming. So we are not just exploiting on land, but also we are exploiting on sea. And all these anthropic activities, all these anthropic activities, they are shaping, and there are many dynamics that they are a bit hidden. So what happened that when we are over-exploiting nature in coastal areas and on the sea, we have a loss in biodiversity, economic loss, a loss of capacity and be adaptive against climate change. So we lose biodiversity in many ways because with intensive agriculture, we discharge many pollutants in rivers, and then they will get to the sea. And when we get that problem, we have a loss of biodiversity, fishes, and that is affecting also the economic because we fish a lot. So at the same time, this is happened in 2019 in Miami. There was a big discharge of fertilizer, and there was the so-called red tide that was a toxic algae. So there we lost biodiversity, but also we lost economic activities like tourism in that area, because for that summer no one could reach the sea because it was impossible to stay there. It was toxic also for humans stay there. So, and when we are taking away natural spaces to enlarge our boundaries of our cities, we are losing our capacity to be adaptive, because many of the natural elements or natural habitats that they are existing or they were existing on coastal areas, they were not only able to counteracting discharge pollution or cleaning or retain pollution, but they were also counteracting climate events, for example. And so all my presentation turns to, sorry, I forgot also this. Another one of the biggest challenge is that in between on the land sea continuum, there are many tools and approaches that they are not working in an integrated way. So we have maritime spatial planning that is planning the sea. There is the land planning on the land, and depending from the country you have a different way and different boundaries where you can plan or not. And then there are some concepts like land sea interaction that is highly important because it's trying to put together the different planning tools. So what happened when we lose all these nature, and my presentation was a bit about how we can use nature to make better place in our coastal areas, also for many reasons. So for example, we should restore some of the natural elements that we destroyed or we urbanized. So this is an example, for example, in Portugal, which they use many European projects to reestablish cordons of dunes, because with the increasing power of extreme events on coastal areas like coastal flooding, storm surges, and the erosion that gets stronger and stronger, they had to reestablish dunes because they are working as a natural coastal defense. And having dunes, there are also many other fauna and flora that they are living on that. So we are enhancing biodiversity, and we are counteracting coastal events. Otherwise, you have also other ways. Here is in Netherlands. So there was already a dike that was was used to counteract coastal flooding. But the municipality decided to, instead to make the dike higher, they decided to use salt marshes. So in front of the old dike, they also added, and they restored actually an old salt marshes that was not there anymore. And so that will also work as an horizontal levee. So it will be good for the biodiversity, but at the same time it will work also a kind of a coastal solution to counteract storm surges or sea level rise. And otherwise, we have some other type of solution that this is in Copenhagen. It's called Amastrand Park. And in Copenhagen, we have also other islands that they are man-made. So in this case, this is an hybrid nature-based solution because it's partly natural, made with dunes, and partly with a small levee, a small dike. But that is also a way to, when we don't have space anymore because we highly urbanize, at least they were trying to rebuild some extra island and make it more nature. So the whole idea is that if we want to have an healthy environment in between land and sea and a healthy sea, we need to restore what we took from the environment, from the coastal areas, or otherwise we have also to find other solutions in order to build a better and resilient coastal areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alberto. Then I would immediately like to give the word to Dr. Veronica Zagari, who is joining us online. I don't know if we will also see her picture online. Yeah. Dr. Zagari is architect and works as guest researcher at the Department of Urbanism at TU Delft in the Netherlands. And she is member of the Instituto Superior de Urbanismo of the University of Buenos Aires. In 2021, she was awarded the IUCN Academic Professional Certificate on the IUCN Global Standard on Nature-Based Solutions. And she is currently the coordinator of the Argentinian wing of the Delta Alliance International. Welcome, Veronica. Can we see the presentation also?
Thank you.
Yeah, great. All right. Can Veronica control the presentation? No? Okay. Veronica, you tell me when to switch to the next slide, please.
Great. Well, thank you, Tom, for the presentation. I'm going to reflect on what's between the people and water, especially focusing on the case of the Paraná Delta, which is located in Argentina, and also the Rio de la Plata, because the Paraná River flows into this river, and it flows to the ocean. It is a very unique case, and it's worth mentioning that picture. You can see that there is a network of transportation and cities located on the wetland, which is the image that you can see on the left. This wealthiest corridor of ours on the Paraná River and on the Rio de la Plata. The ports were very important not only during the boom of the agri-exporter days. It is possible to distinguish a complex network of cities of really different scales and specializations, and also a complex transportation network, which includes highways, railways, and of course, the ports. But this network of cities and transport network is located on a wetland, which also has a great biodiversity. This is a very vast wetland located in the image on the.
Excuse me, Veronica. The sound is not coming through very well. Maybe you can switch off your camera and for a better sound. Thank you.
Okay. Now it's okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, if everything goes wrong, please tell me and I change my Wi-Fi. Thank you. Well, as I was mentioning that this complex network of cities and ports and transportation network is located on a wetland, which has great biodiversity and suffers from the pressures as a result of the economic development and also as a result of the growth of the cities. These cities produce a great impact on the area, as well as suffer from the effects of climate change, such as floods, droughts, and other recurrent extreme climatic events that are, on the present, they are happening more often. So as I mentioned, there are pressures, and please can you please go to the next slide? Thank you. There are pressures related to this complex situation, and these pressures are related to land use change for production and urbanization, are related also to the increased demand for commodities that create a need for transportation, and also by climate change, of course, an increase in temperature, the increase in climate variability, precipitation, and other effects. These pressures have associated effects such as deforestation, loss of biodiversity, severe floods and droughts, and other negative effects, not only for the cities, but also for the environment. So we can reflect on what's in between the pressing issues and these associated effects. We have a context which is characterized by a policy fragmentation and a complex governance framework. This also needs an agreement between private sector, public sectors, and an increase in public participation. It is also characterized by a large number of actors and sectors and a need for development and enhanced quality of life. Please, the next slide. Thank you. So what can we do about this? There are different paths towards an integration among society, coastlands, and water. These paths can be associated to integrated and adaptive planning strategies. They are also associated to a need for public participation and citizen engagement. Also, disaster risk management to attend the possible consequences of climate change and unplanned urban planning. And also, it is a need, it needs for a paradigm shift towards sustainable development. Not always the development must be associated with unsustainable practices, but on the contrary, we can relate this development to sustainable practices and to a shift of the paradigm between what happens in the future. And I strongly believe that we can link this shift, this paradigm shift with moving towards nature-based solutions and include nature and ecosystem-based practices into the planning framework, and also within a correct and a strong public participation framework. And also, these nature-based solutions are also in line to the Sustainable Development Goals achievement. So I believe that we can create a paradigm shift if we include population into the different decisions that are taken on the coasts and the cities, and if we also turn into integrated and adaptive planning strategies. So that is my reflection, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Veronica. So then for our third intervention, we're going again online, and I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Jean-Luc de Cock, who works at the Environmental Modeling Unit of the Flemish Institute for Technological Research in Belgium, where his work focuses on the research related to the design of policy support tools and system dynamics modeling of integrated systems. Jean-Luc, welcome.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Tom, for the introduction. Maybe I should...
Do the split screen again, please.
Yes, let me check. View split screen. Should I...
No, it's okay. Thank you, Jean-Luc. You can start the presentation.
Okay. Will you manage the presentation, Tom?
Yes, you can tell me when to switch slides.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I will switch off my screen just in case. My video. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Tom. So I would like to take you briefly through the objectives of Water4All Partnership and also the water-oriented living labs, kind of communities of practice for developing innovative solutions for water management, and also briefly address the outcomes or the objectives of the coastal project, which was recently concluded, which we coordinated. So the Water for All partnership is something that has, is a long-term commitment. There's about 90 million euro financing for a period of 7 years to create a long-term commitment between water experts, stakeholders, and also policymakers, and to work on innovative solutions. It started in 2022, and it's ongoing. And the interesting thing is that it can also be used in several ways. There are several pillars. And one of these pillars is looking at demonstration. Yes, thank you, Tom. So looking at that, pillar D is focusing on demonstration. And these are actually the labs where we can develop the innovative solutions. And it's interesting because we are also looking at the land-sea continuum, which is one of the main challenges, as we noticed in the previous presentations. We are not only thinking of coastal cities, but also connecting rural and coastal development, and eventually also offshore activities and marine biodiversity. So this is not easy to do. And if we look at that, we see that innovation must come from several angles, and we must bring together expertise, but also experiences from different sectors. Next slide, please. One of the ways to do that is, as I said, is to create communities of practice. We do this in several projects and ongoing initiatives internationally, but also at the regional and national and local level. But usually these projects have a limited lifetime, and the participants in projects have their own agenda, and after the project ends, there's no continuation. And this is different for Water for All and the water-oriented living labs, because here we create a platform which has a longer-term commitment, so people get to know one another, and they work on solutions, and they can further develop them and create a much wider impact of the work that they do. This is done by bringing together sectors, working on solutions, but also working together with stakeholders, which is very important nowadays because we want their commitment as well, and they need to be brought in because they have their own local expertise. Next slide, please. Now, one of, I think, nice examples is the Coastal Project, which was financed from the European Horizon program. It ended last year. And this project was addressing the problems related to land-sea synergy. It's a challenge because we know that both in terms of the activities, but also in terms of administration, the rural and coastal areas are quite different. It's an entirely different world. Certainly, if you look at the Belgian coast, we have densely populated coastal cities with tourism development, and in the rural area, it's quite different. You have nature and a lot of agriculture, but of course there are connections, opportunities, and also challenges in terms of water management and pressure on space, which is scarce. Now, the idea of the Coastal Project was to develop innovative solutions which look at the picture as a whole in a holistic way, together with the stakeholders. So they work together with the experts to co-create solutions which had a more holistic perspective. Looking at the agenda also of the Limits to Growth report in the 70s, as we know, economic growth is not unlimited, certainly not in coastal regions. So if there are solutions, they may work at the sectoral level, but what happens if several economic activities compete and do not work together in harmony? Next slide, please. This is what we see here are some examples for the Belgian case study in the project. What we see in the left is development of real estate close to the harbor. So the harbor is very important nowadays of the city of Ostend for renewable energy, offshore wind energy development. But it's also important city in terms of tourism, and real estate development is ongoing along the Belgian coast. This is not always easy to do because we know that there are interactions between the different activities. We also are working on nature-based solutions. On the same hand, on the other hand, we also have fisheries, which was important, but it is more and more becoming under pressure in terms of economic value and logistics. It's a sector in transition. And what we see is that different activities can be developed, but they are also, they have to be considered in a dynamic way because the whole system as a whole is changing over time. The next slide, please. So what we did together with the stakeholders, I will not take you through the whole process because it was quite complex, but we brought them together, coastal and rural stakeholders, farmers, fisher, the representatives of the blue economy, and we asked them to look at the land-sea interactions from a holistic perspective and try to make a qualitative picture of these interactions, which was then translated into models to develop innovative solutions. So what we see here is a kind of an overview aggregation of the complete causal picture for the Belgian case study, where we have linked water management to spatial planning, tourism, fisheries, and also blue economy. And what we see is that water especially, but also space are very important connecting factors. And this was then also taken into consideration later in the project to discuss different solutions, where you can focus, for example, on drought problems or water management. What was very interesting, and I think the most important lesson from the project is that we didn't expect this, but the coastal and rural stakeholders had a quite different background, and they were not always familiar with one another. But working together on these kind of diagrams, they learned to think about solutions from different perspectives, and it created quite a nice atmosphere, and also, I think, a continuous working condition, which is now continued because we are working on a new initiative, which is a knowledge exchange platform where they will continue to participate. Next slide, please. So this is a quick picture on the knowledge exchange platform which we are launching now. It can give access to the outcomes of the project, of course, but also to data, which is made available, the models as well, also evidence-based solutions and a user forum and also scenarios. Next slide, please. So if you would like to take a look, you can just access the coastal project through the link which is shown in the presentation. From there, you can go to the knowledge platform, but also to the data repository, where you can examine the papers, but also the models. And what's especially interesting are the flipbooks generated in the project. I think the main point is, maybe we'll come to questions later, is that if we look at water management and the land-sea continuum, that is very important. Water is a connecting factor, but to develop solutions, you need to bring together the coastal and rural actors and stakeholders. And for that, you need adapted tools and also approaches. And I think one of the ways to do that that we tested in the project was this systems thinking and co-creating system diagrams and eventually models to work with the stakeholders, but also to bring them together. And I think that is my contribution to the session of today. So I'm happy to answer any questions on the approach and the project outcomes.
Thank you very much, Jean-Luc. We'll take the questions later with us when we go into the
Yes.
panel discussion. We have three more presentations coming up, but we're first going to take a small break with the Mentimeter question again, to hear again from you in the room and online. Let me see if I can switch back. Yeah, and now I need to move to the next page. All right, there we have the question. So we've already heard three interesting presentations where a number of challenges have been presented, but what do you think is the main challenge for coastal areas? Certainly you can repeat what has already been presented, but maybe there are other aspects that we didn't think of neither, which are special for your case, or which you've seen. Competition for space, pressure on space, similar. Upstream pressures. Also in coastal areas, we have upstream and downstream dynamics. Making use of blue economy opportunities while preserving the ecosystem. Yes, there's trade-offs, and how do we combine those different functions? Different priorities, different backgrounds, threat to biodiversity, competing needs. Land value pressures, then disasters or hazards like cyclones, tsunamis, land use changes, lack of intersectoral collaboration, it's also a good one. All right, while some people might still be punching in their answers, we are going to continue. And I'm going to see if Florian is online. Yes. So our next speaker is Florian Lux. Let me see if I can bring... Yeah, we have Florian with us. Florian is currently the project manager of the EU-funded Go Blue project for UNEP and UN Habitat, supporting sustainable and resilient development in Kenya's coastal area. Before that, he has been the special assistant to the Deputy Executive Director of UN Habitat, and previously has also worked for the OECD in Paris and in the Office of the United Nations Secretary General in New York, with a focus on climate and sustainable development. Florian, thank you for joining us online. I'm going to, let's see, the presentation. Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Great pleasure. Thank you so much. I kept my my slides very simple. Interestingly enough, of course, the component of Go Blue project that I lead for UNEP and UN Habitat has some very similar title to this session, Connecting People, Cities, and the Ocean. We're dealing with innovative land sea planning and management for sustainable and resilient Kenyan coast. Just to give you a quick introduction to the Go Blue project, it's an EU-funded project that is jointly implemented with Germany, Italy, France, Portugal, and the UN. So we're only one component, but our component is mainly focused on finding ways to combine land and sea planning. So we are currently developing guidelines for land sea planning that can be used by the Kenyan counties. And just to say that, you know, there's an economic block of the Kenyan coastal counties called all the counties together, Jumuiya County Sapwani. So you see the logo also below. So we are working with these coastal counties, the sub-national governments, to enhance the specific planning for land and sea. Some of them have already got county spatial plans that have very relevant information for the ocean as well, but a lot of them have not integrated the ecosystems of the ocean and other key factors in such county special plans. So partly we're also assisting counties with revising their plans accordingly. Then there is, of course, a big data component to all of this to make informed decisions. A lot more information needs to be available on how land and sea interact. We are upgrading GIS data labs in all coastal counties. We're creating a hub for central data collection and also to give access to the coastal block of all the different data and for exchange of data. At the same time, we are implementing pilot activities that sort of live in the spirit within all the different counties. There's a wide range of activities within UNEP and Habitat that have to do with public space upgrading, with wastewater. There's a carbon credit project on mangroves as well in Lamu County, for example. There's capacity building for beach management units, but there's also an innovation component. So hackathons are going to be organized, and we are trying to also assist young entrepreneurs or small and medium enterprises to benefit from blue economy opportunities, but always with an angle of sustainability of those activities. Next slide, please. I have an overview slide of, these are just some beautiful pictures from the Swahili architecture and some of the places we work in. So you can switch to the next one, which is an overview of the Kenyan coast. These are the coastal counties, and I will circulate this. Apologize if it's too small for some of you, but it just gives an overview of the different interventions. So as discussed in Lamu, there's a mangrove project to create carbon credits with mangrove preservation. But there's also a public space upgrading of a public beach, a stretch of public land on the beach that will be upgraded. There's a community engagement process that is going to be organized. And also people are going to have input on the types of designs, but certainly there should be benches for sitting. There's a playground that is dilapidated that's going to be revamped. And also there is a cool room and the fisheries department of the county. So there's accessibility to fish, but there's no kiosk at the moment. So we're also trying to make sure that this is a space that can be, used for consumption of fish and also attractive to tourists. As you know, Lamu is a heritage site, a UNESCO heritage site. So it needs a lot of upgrading also to attract more tourism. In Kilifi and Mombasa, there are also public space projects. In Mombasa, there's also a wastewater project in an informal settlement using nature-based solutions to filter raw sewage that is currently going straight into the ocean. There's some space there for what they call shambas, gardens, that help with growing vegetables and things like that. But the water that is being used currently is not safe for agricultural use. So this is something that has been tried and tested in a prison nearby by our UNEP colleagues, and this is going to be deployed here as well. And so we are hoping that by showcasing the feasibility of this nature-based solution for wastewater treatment, that we will attract further investment in this area from hotels and other key partners that have needs for wastewater treatment. Then, of course, we have in Taita Taveta, this is one of the coastal counties of Kenya that is not actually on the coast, it's behind the coast, but it counts as coastal. We have a solid waste strategy and audit. So we've undertaken detailed audits of the waste flows, and a lot of waste ends up in rivers that end up in the ocean, actually, especially plastic waste. So we are going to upgrade or actually build a material recovery facility that will enable us to do plastic recycling. In Kwale, we work a lot with the marine protected areas. There's to upgrade capacity of local partners to manage these areas, but also in Diani Chale, working on creating an additional protected area that is currently not yet listed. And then in Kilifi, there's not only the Mazingira Public Park upgrading, but also a neighborhood and regeneration plan. And further investments have already been added to the Go Blue project here when it comes to land use plan and physical planning. So in general, we see there's a lot of population growth in this coastal area. It is very similar to neighboring Tanzania. So I think we will also look to expand into other areas that have similar challenges. So it's wedged between Somalia and Tanzania, actually. And also inland waters, there's more and more demand for similar activities because, of course, we have Great Lakes, the Great Lakes region. Kenya has counties that have big lakes and that have also blue economy challenges. So this is sort of a combined package that is geared towards achieving the SDGs, creating jobs, but at the same time preserving the very ecosystems that provide opportunities for this blue economy. So this is just a very quick glance. The other components are working also on vocational training. This is the German component. The Italian component is dealing mainly with value chains, providing boats to fishermen, upgrading cassava value chain. The French are dealing with the safety on the ocean. A lot of fishermen don't have safety trainings or material that is sufficient. The Portuguese component is dealing with culture and heritage. And of course, tourism is a big income for the Kenyan coast. So culture and heritage and protection of those goes hand in hand. And interestingly enough, those are in urban settings in Mombasa and Lamu. So reviving sort of the urban regeneration also has a heritage component and a tourism component. So it's a very holistic approach and combining all those different elements. So I'll leave it at that. Of course, looking forward to the discussion. And I think there's a lot of learnings from this project, including also the multi-sectorial approach and the multi-stakeholders that could be expanded elsewhere. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Florian. We will have the chance later in the panel to further ask questions to Florian as well. Then we will go to the next presentation, and I would like to ask Dr. Karen Hetz on stage. Karen is Senior Sector Economist for Urban Climate Resilience at KfW Development Bank, and she heads the Bank Urban Resilience Lab. The lab develops innovative and transformative project approaches to increase effectiveness of finance cooperation. Welcome, Karen.
Yeah, thank you very much, and hello. I have a different screen here, so I'm a bit confused. Okay, I'm going to talk about a project that KfW Development Bank is financing in Beira, Mozambique. It looks into mangrove protection. We know mangrove areas of utmost importance when it comes to managing flood risks from heavy precipitation events, from storm surges, and this is particularly true when we look into the effects of climate change that will hit in even more intense and with higher frequencies in the future. At the same time, and we've been hearing this from the former speakers, there is a huge pressure on wetland areas. Lots of them are being lost due to population influx, due to pollution, due to cutting of trees. And even if we have protected areas, it's very, very difficult to sustain them, in particular in the context of the Global South, where we have the situation of informal developments. So there are solutions that are needed to ensure the sustainable protection of these areas, in particular in the context of highly urbanizing city centers in the Global South. And I'm going to take you, as I said, to Beira, a city in Mozambique. It's a port city. We have an estuary area here with some mangrove forests, and it's highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. It's one of the areas in the African coast areas there where the effects are seen the most visible already today, and where in the future, in particular, the storm surges and cyclones will aggravate even further. KfW has financed the project, a two-phase project, in total with 31 million euros. It's co-funded by the World Bank, the second phase with 60 million, and then there's a contribution of 4 million by the government of Mozambique. In the first phase, and this is what you see in this picture here, there was a reforestation of the mangrove area. So the number of trees was doubled from 1,100 to 2,200. We talk about an area of 31 hectares in an inner city center, so to say, along the river of this estuary area. In addition to that, the natural riverbed was re-established, canals were removed, and sea outlets were constructed. But now I was talking about the challenge of sustainability of investment, and this is where the second phase actually comes in. What was done here was the mangrove areas, or this area in which the financing was concentrated on, was extended by a park area, another 18 hectares. So in the areas that were laying a bit higher above the ground, there were sports fields, some playgrounds, a market. We also have a theater that was integrated into this urban park setting, a multi-sectoral or multi-purpose, you could actually say, park that developed. And what I'd like to highlight here in particular are two aspects that are very, very important. The one was this whole area was fenced in, not just the 18 hectare, but also the 31 hectare of mangroves. So it was developed into one holistic park. It is secure, there's security on site, so it's very difficult to actually go in and cut trees. It's very difficult to litter because it's very nicely maintained. And you have a clear delineation line when it comes to informal settlements to mushroom into this area. And the second aspect that I'd like to highlight is this park, and I show you also a bit of a picture from the playgrounds and the market areas. This park is managed economically. So there is an autonomous park management authority that is generating an income by establishing entrance fees. It's quite low, it's about 8 euro cents entrance, but it's enough to maintain, so to say, the park and its functioning, and to ensure that this area of mangroves remain protected. And in the end, we can say this is a very successful approach. Why? Because it was achieved, so to say, that this ecosystem services are re-functioning again. We can make use of the mangrove area, so to say, in flood reduction. It's seen in models and it's also tested in reality. We had 2 cyclone events already to hit this area, and the flooding in particular of informal settlements adjacent to this park area, and go-to settlement, for instance, has been reduced significantly. And this has also led to a huge improvement of the living conditions of people, not just in terms of flooding, but now we have actually created a situation where we can come in a third phase, or perhaps also together with government, to upgrade the settlement. There was a precondition to bring an infrastructure, basic infrastructure, sanitation, toilets and what have you, that you don't have such a high exposure to flood risks anymore. So this is a quite successful story that I would like to share. And also what I would like to add here is, with this park, there was a value added to this protection of the mangroves. So it was politically very attractive to do that, because we also created an impact in terms of improvement of living conditions, recreational facilities. So all of this was lacking to some extent in the area. And also there was a job creation that cannot be neglected. 60 employment opportunities in the park, but also there are little businesses that are emerging. So we have the market, we have the restaurant, we have the theater, and then there's also little startups that are coming up. And this is also a very, very big argument for political decision makers to opt for such an approach. I'd like to thank you for your attention here, and I'm available for questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And then we go to our last presentation, which is again online. We're going to hear from, I'm going to check if we can, yeah. So yes, we have with us Dr. Majik Sek, who's a senior partnership specialist at the World Bank. She leads communications and partners outreach for operations related to environment, natural resources, and blue economy in West Africa. She is a specialist in the design and implementation of strategic communications, digital presence, and advocacy through partnerships and stakeholder engagement. And she coordinates communication for regional partnerships such as the West Africa Coastal Areas Management Program, or known as WACA. So thank you to have you with us, Majik. The word is for you.
Hello, and thank you so much for having us. My name is Majik Sek. I work as a senior partnership specialist for the World Bank with a focus on Africa. In Africa, multiple crises are threatening livelihood. So ensuring that development actors at all levels are included is crucial to the delivery of a sound development agenda. My role is to work with teams to engage with clients, engage with communities, engage with journalists and media, make sure that we bring them to the table. We give them a sense of ownership and make them contribute to the implementation of impactful programs. Next, please. Let me talk about WACA. WACA is a West Africa Coastal Areas Management Program that was launched back in 2017. And let me tell you what brought this program. In West Africa, urban population has doubled, with the coast often selected as a preferred location. The coast in West Africa is now home to 1/3 of the population, and generates 56% of the GDP. Of course, with this comes many issues: flooding, erosion, and pollution. For example, in 2018, nearly 7 million tons of plastic waste was produced and 20% of this amount was generated within 30% of the coast. So focusing on this issue is really crucial to development. Next. This is why the World Bank and countries launched the program to fight those three challenges. So far, we have 563 million, and this is dedicated to 9 coastal countries. To scale up our efforts, we have a different platform that allows us to really put at scale knowledge, finance, and dialogue. And this has allowed us to work with partners like France, Japan, and Netherlands, and leverage about $800 million. We also collaborate very closely with regional think tanks that allow us to bring African ownership and also to bring the African leadership needed to solve these issues. Next. So why is WACA focusing on working with these unconventional partners? It's because we produce a lot of analytical work, but beyond the analytical work, which is needed to make development decision, we need to bring a human narrative. We have the economic story maybe from the analytical work, but it's important to understand, show what people think, what they fear. Next, please. How do we do this? We have different ways. We work with journalists. We have a network of about 100 journalists we've been working with for the last 6-7 years that we invite at regular briefing. We invite them to site visit. We invite them to strategic event. And we also give them information to promote fact-based reporting and promote transparency. Journalists need to have the right figure, the right numbers to be able to do that. Next. We also work with photojournalists. This picture was in my village. It's the story of families who every night fear that the sea will take them away. Next. This is another picture that we did for the plastic report, plastic pollution. These kids who have no other playground, that this space, this canal filled with plastic, just to wake people up and say, look at this. Look at how these kids live in plastic. It is worth investing in curbing plastic pollution. Next. But in these images, these very powerful images, we also bring stories of hope. This woman who left Ghana to come to Senegal to work at a recycling plant and who's finding happiness, or at least a better life. Next. We have a radio, we have a coastal radio that we produce in communities, in local language, to allow people to express their feelings, express what are the emerging needs in their local language. Often we have to go, often even in the village, with a portable power to be able to produce. And this allows us to really get a feedback loop, know what people think, what do they want, and adjust maybe our activities. Next, please. We also work a lot. All of this actually help us mobilize communities and promote a behavior change. This behavior change allows us to really gather people's collective power to make change, to bring constant resilience, but at the same time, make sure that we understand what are the social, economic, and cultural aspects that could be barrier, but that could also be leveraged to build a better resilience for the people. This is why we engage with communities and often with unconventional partners. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Maji, for your presentation. We're going to move to the panel, and for that I'm going to invite my colleague Remco Dost, who is a senior consultant in international water management. He has 25 years of worldwide experience in the field of water management, earth observation, climate adaptation, and water safety. Remco, join me please on stage. Then we will bring back the other panel members. But before doing that, we're going to go to Mentimeter again. And I'm going to again try to pull up the next question. All right, so Remco, I'll leave you in control.
Thank you, Tom. Good being here. Welcome, everybody, on the last days of this great forum. We have two panelists here. So, Alberto and Karen, can you please join me on stage? We're going to try to have a bit of an interactive session. So, indeed, we are already going to pop up a Mentimeter question. Because I would like to start off the panel with a bit a practical situation. We all just came out of COVID, which was disastrous in many ways. But if you look at nature, they actually had a bit of breather here and there, I think, in those 2 years. And now that you see that COVID at least is in the background for now, we see also that coastal tourism is taking place again in vast numbers. So that's why we were interested to see, does ecotourism, as a bit of a practical example, actually, can that be sustainable? Now we have 22 answers. I see a lot of yes and a few no, so we are a bit divided. Jean-Luc, can I entice you to give your thoughts on this?
Yes, thank you, Remco. I think, yeah, this was one of the questions I brought into the panel. The reason was that during our project, we were discussing limits to growth, especially of coastal areas. The idea behind it is that growth cannot be unlimited and that coastal tourism is very important for economic development and prosperity of the coastal populations, but it also poses many challenges. And if it continues all the time, it cannot be sustainable anymore. Ecotourism is perhaps something else, because here we are talking about specific solutions to make tourism more sustainable, like developing opportunities in the coastal hinterland to relieve the coastal zone. But the idea was that limited development of tourism, which is usually the main mechanism, is a problem in the end, especially if you look at the long term. That was what was behind the question. So my own answer would be yes, but depending on how you understand the question, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you think any nature-based solutions could be integrated here?
Yes, I think so. We also discussed this, of course, in the project, because we were looking at the solutions from different angles, developing tourism, but also nature-based solutions. It could help, but in the same time, you also have to look at the economic opportunities. And tourism is always very dominant, certainly for the Belgian coast. It's difficult to provide room for nature-based solutions because there is not much room left there. It may be different in other regions. So it depends on the local conditions, I think.
Okay. Talking of local conditions, Veronica, when we look at your region, that's quite a bit different than the Belgian coastline. Do you think the negative effects of human activities can be mitigated in your area?
Yes, I think that, it is needed to implement a comprehensive coastal management plan that includes the collaboration between different sectors, the inclusion of social participation, which is at the present here we lack of social engagement, And also, I think that it is important to develop plans of coastal protection, environmental conservation, and most of all, to create this governance context that allow the collaboration between different sectors and stakeholders. I think that that is the main need for helping this community to mitigate the effects of climate change and the negative pressures of urban development.
Okay. Well, that's a good point. Florian, now you have been working a lot on that, I think. So also, how did you bring, so how can we assure that each and everybody would benefit from blue economy opportunities?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And my immediate reaction was also that it can help, but it's not without limits, right? So it's sort of not a yes or no question, finally. There are some parameters which you have to assure, work hand in hand. And if it's ecotourism, it has a certain scale and it's integrated in the local community. I think in the Go Blue project, what we really try to do for long-term sustainability of this project, which is formally closing next year, is to involve the local community as much as we can and provide pilots that could be replicated or scaled up. When it comes to coastal development in Kenya, of course, the opportunities for ecotourism are still large, but it's important that we have a good multi-layered governance between the national level, the international and the local level in terms of protecting certain ecosystems, making sure that the use is sustainable. But yeah, so these are key things where we can harness opportunities. The mangroves, it's interesting to hear also from Mozambique. My colleagues also partly work in Mozambique and in other places in the Indian Ocean, which have very similar challenges. The mangrove in Lamu, for example, in Lamu County, 67% of the mangroves of Kenya are in Lamu. But it's very not yet very developed. So here we are dealing with a scenario where we're trying to protect existing stock more than actually reforesting. And that has particular challenges when it comes to getting carbon credits. But we are, developing it. And Lamu is also a thriving tourist destination, despite some security concerns that emanate sometimes from the bordering Somalia within the county, not necessarily the touristic areas. But I think, so generally speaking, there are lots of opportunities, but the right parameters have to be put in place. The community has to be engaged. And those are key. And of course, the urban development, the thriving urban development needs to be put in check in terms of its environmental impact. So looking more at the quality than the quantity of the growth, for example, by creating more compact settings that have good infrastructure. So those are my few thoughts on that. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Karen, that links a bit to what you are doing, isn't it? I heard the word mangroves. So do you think an urban park can be an opportunity?
Not sure if it's on. I mean, I have to perhaps say in the beginning, the park was established for the purpose of flood protection. So we had a very different objective. And I think when it comes to tourism, you would perhaps look into a park development from a different point of view. Perhaps you would also emphasize a bit more on biodiversity and these issues. And I would, in general, say, yes, I think the concept of looking for opportunities of multi-purpose, so to say. So this is a nature protection and then income generation. Yes, that in general is good. Perhaps also the concept of entrance fees and fence around that could actually be applied. But in this particular setting and how we designed the park, I would say this is more for recreational purposes for the local population, but not something that I would see would also attract persons to actually come to the park from a larger distance. This is really provide opportunities for recreation, for income, etc., for local population around that.
Okay. Well, that's a good insight. So, Alberto, do you have any thoughts on how we can enable conditions for resilient land sea urban planning?
Yeah, so I think that as I was highlighting, there are many approaches to and a better integration of those, as we saw also with the Horizon project that they were trying to planning the land sea and find ways also with the Go Blue project. So a better integration of the tools it will be good. It will be a good to better manage the coastal areas, and but in general terms, I think other enablers are, for example, having data, availability of data on coastal areas, because in order to plan and to manage the coastal land sea continuum, we need to know what is happening, in which way. So data and doing the right assessment, risk assessment, environmental assessment is very important, because we have to know specifically where to act in order to plan it in an appropriate way. And last but not least, also the community involvement. It's always very important. And I can say, like, for example, a little example, in Denmark, many small cities or in different parts of Denmark, they have housing directly on the sea, almost on the sea. They just get out from the house. And what happens is that they are doing privately their own solution that is actually forbidden. So a better involvement with the community, and make them understanding that fixing something in front of their house is just moving the problem to the next door or to the rest of the coast is not working. So working with the community, create awareness, and also designing together solution will be a good way to enabling a good planning of the land sea continuum.
Okay. So when you're planning this, how do you actually, I was a bit triggered by your presentation, how do you balance restored habitats and natural-based solutions? So what can be full nature, and where do you need to aid nature to sustain? How do you balance that?
So I would say that always we have to keep in mind that there are local characteristics that we have to take into account. So if we are in a highly dense and urbanized coastal areas, a city, obviously we cannot put it will be difficult to put a wetlands in front of a very urbanized city. So you have to find other solution that can be the solution that I show in front of the coast of Copenhagen, that is a sort of an extra island that is providing coastal adaptation. At the same time, there is a new beach for the people that is living there. There is a lot of sport activity happening on that island, because there are many things happening. Obviously, when you are able to get a bit outside of the city and you are other area which maybe they are more prone to have a wetlands or a salt marshes, there you have to work more naturally. Obviously, when you are in the city, it's more tricky and difficult.
But not impossible. Don't the city goers also like nature in front of their doorstep?
The example of Beira, I think, was very interesting, because it was next to the city. So it's always a matter of local condition and understanding where you are and what is possible. I think so.
So Maggie, you're an expert in that, isn't it? In local conditions and connecting to the local people. What suggestion would you give to us? How do you ensure the people participations to the project outcomes?
Well, you know, engaging with community is very tricky. First of all, like my colleague said, you really need to understand the communities, but this needs to be really a multi-pronged approach. That means communities have to be approached from different sides. What we do, all these activities are first of all, packaged in a communication strategy that allow us to do different things at the same time. We use meetings to inform people and update on where we are with the project. We use the radio to offer a platform where people have a voice, but also where people can come and give us feedback. So we can have a feedback loop that the operational team can use to say, okay, maybe this is working well, this is not working well, these are the emergent needs, what can we do? We also bring journalists, because journalists have really the power to live with people, to understand them sometimes better and provide them the right numbers to produce stories. We work on social media a lot. You know, a lot of our youth in West Africa, like 80% of the youth are connected online. We use the social media to give them updates, give them number, help them know what are the issues and change behavior. And often we also bring donors like like the Nordic Development Fund, to go to Ghana and work with women on mangrove that they funded, so they can see that it is worth investing your money into this. So this community outreach is done with different aspects, and it brings great results. Thank you.
Okay. Now, thank you very much for that insight. And I heard you say a word that I think is both beautiful and also scary, and that is social media. Because we see both sides from that in our lives the whole day. But when we started off this session, we actually started also with a social media kind of thing, Mentimeter, I think so. And we ask everybody, so where are you from? And just asking generic to the whole panel. So when you look at that, would social media be a way to learn from each other? Because you see, we come from different countries, we have our different challenges, we have our different approaches. How can we best combine these and put these into practice? Who dares to kick off? I heard we have some data portals. How do you go from a data portal to the public sector to put it into practice, for example?
I mean, I would say that it's always good when we are able to share. So this event on social media through this data portal, that in most of the case they are supported from the European project or other funding. So they are always good because when we can share knowledge, the important thing is that we also have to be able to read those information in a proper way in order to then use it rightly. Otherwise, because it's not that one solution is working everywhere, vice versa. So we have always to take and try to get the best from. I don't think that we can just bring one solution to another place because we saw that that is working, but there is also a little bit more work to do. But obviously, sharing knowledge is always very relevant.
Nothing to add to that.
Okay, very good. Okay, now we still have some time. We can also check. Do we have some? Maybe the audience has some questions for the panel they would like to share. I see we have a couple of hands here. We also probably have some questions online. I suggest you take one of the one live, then one from online, and then back to the room.
Thank you. Hi. Yeah, thank you. My name is Jose Pablo Murillo. I work for SIWI. I'm part of the Source to Sea team. So first I want to congratulate the panelists and the organizers of this event because it's very interesting. And it's exactly what we are doing. We have implemented this type of projects in Ethiopia and Vietnam. And we had a session on Sunday, a bit discussing like case studies of these, let's say, upstream, downstream, nature-based solutions to address different issues. So I wanted to ask you, and maybe first I just want to mention that in SIWI we host the Secretariat of the Action Platform for Source to Sea Management, and part of what we do is share lessons learned. So it would be very interesting if, yeah, maybe we can reach out to you and learn a bit more from you. But yeah, so my question would be if you can share some of the challenges that you have faced implementing your projects, especially the pilot projects that were shared, and how you address them. That would be very interesting. Thank you.
Okay.
I can start on the challenges. I mean, with this developments in general, like when you look into inner city areas, there's a huge competition for land. We've heard about that. And of course, in the context of the project, the land was not unused. So you would always have to deal to some extent with resettlement. In the context of that project, relocation was already negotiated before we came in, so it was clear that people would have to be moved out of that area. And I understand that this is also part of an adaptation effort, because to some extent we would have to also acknowledge the fact that it's not possible to stay in areas that are very high at risk, and that there's also responsibility to make sure that people would get the opportunity to live in a more secure place. So this is aspects that I think are always on the table when we talk about nature-based solutions, and in particular to, you know, renaturation, so to say, and reforestation of areas, wetland areas, mangrove areas, what have you. You will always find that these areas are to some extent used, also perhaps for economic or other activities. We've also heard about the aspect of participation. I think it's of utmost importance to make sure that whatever you design, whatever solution you create, you have the communities on board, because if you want to have this sustainable, so to say, as a solution, it needs to be connected to the context. And in the case of the park in Beira, it was done to such an extent that in a step by step, the concept of the park was developed together with communities. So there was a proposal, that it was made public, so to say. There was opportunities to comment on it. Comments were taken into consideration. It was developed further, etc. So there were lots of opportunities to be involved and you know, to shape the park. And I think this is really, really important. And I mean, we've heard also from my colleague how this can be done the best. I think a challenge in general that we had from the finance perspective, if you work with an autonomous park authority, you have someone else to operate the park, and you have another entity, so to say, to develop the park. And during the finance and the implementation, you would need to make sure that there's a good coordination between these two actors. At times, it's not easy to understand, where is the park? Are we already in operation? Are we still in development and it's overlapping? So have a good coordination in terms of that. Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenges and lessons learned, but they're manageable, so it's not just to be discouraged. In the case of the Beira project, we had, I think, 40 households that needed to be relocated and 8 spaza shops. I know other contexts from a project, we were talking about 800 entities that were affected and shaping. So it really depends also on the preconditions that you find there. But relocation definitely is an issue that I would see as the biggest problem. And we know also from other contexts. I mean, let's look into South Africa, for instance, and due to also the history of apartheid, you have also certain societal expectations or boundaries in addressing these issues of relocation. It can become quite difficult and overly complex. And from the financial perspective, that would also be a risk that we would not take in every case, where we would say we would resign and not go into it.
Thank you, Karen. Any of the other panelists wants to chip in?
I have a reaction also, but go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to react quickly to the issue of the tenureship. You know, in some places, this has been a big issue also for us. We had to make sure that every park we develop within the project is on land owned by the counties. In one in one county, we had first discussed a space that was indeed, there was a claim of ownership. So that would have meant having issues with that, and also potentially having to move people. Something we did not want to entertain. So we had, ended up going to places that are already usable and that are owned by the county. And speaking of land rights, this is something in Kenya that is also a big issue. Records are not always digitized. So when we are now creating data systems, this will also enable us to digitize records and make them available throughout a region, not only within one county, something that has also been lacking. And we've been talking a bit about social media, but also about tech and innovation, or about technology as such. And I think the use of the visualization of the data and the processing of that data is very important. Not only the availability, but also the processing and how it's going to be used. In our case, we use the social media more to rally communities, let's say, because people have access to all of that. But then there's also sort of the use of data for policymakers, which is a bit of a different kettle of fish. So just my quick reaction to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Florian. Jean-Luc?
Yeah. Yes, maybe a quick reaction from the experience we had with the coastal project is that our main ambition was to make sure that solutions that were discussed in the co-creation sessions with the stakeholders, that these were made evidence-based, so that we were collecting data and could do an impact assessment, which is also largely a quantitative job. It's different from discussing solutions and developing scenarios and narrative scenarios. And some case studies had more difficulty managing the modeling process, which took more time than we anticipated. And this was also, I think, in hindsight, we could have improved the process by having more regular interactions with our stakeholders so that we could discuss models during their development to avoid that, that these models became too complex or out of scope, given the diagrams or the solutions that were developed by the stakeholders. So it's very important if you set up a project together with stakeholders and want to develop solutions together with them in a co-creation process, that you involve them all the time during the project as much as possible. Even if you're working on models, which is a kind of specific task, but you need to interact with them because they can also help us improve our data and bring in data, or sometimes they have their own tools. This is very important.
No progress without participation from the stakeholders.
Yeah.
Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Shall we take one online question? Can we have the microphone?
Hello. So there are a couple of questions. I will choose one of them. So one question from Wesley Pereira. What is the importance of the coastal regulated zones to promote sustainable development and protect coastal ecosystems? What is the importance of coastal regulated zones to promote sustainable development and protect coastal ecosystems?
So you mean protected areas with regulated coast? Yeah. I mean, it's important because obviously you are enhancing biodiversity while you are protecting. So that is also working with MSP that is based on working with ecosystems. So in many cases you have MPAs that they are marine protected areas. So you have also, when we are watching to the land sea continuum, we have to have protected area on land, but also on sea, because in many cases there are certain type of algae, like depending in the sea where you are, but like Posidonia, which they are not just areas where fish are spawning and nurturing, but they are also counteracting the effect of climate change. So keeping protected those areas, you will enhance biodiversity, you will have a better and healthy ecosystem, and at the same time is also supporting the fight against climate change. So.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we had one more question here in the room.
Okay.
Yes, my name is Simon Tho. I am from Kenya. I did the update of the NDC, the adaptation part, and the core benefits with mitigation. And I think the problem in the coastal area is really, really huge. We are barely scratching at the surface here. We face problems in from three directions. One is sea level rise, and it is also accompanied by over-extraction of groundwater, the wells, and that is interfering with with the interface between freshwater and salty water. And a very huge problem all the way from the source, which is in the mountain towers, to the sea, is agricultural activities by smallholder farmers. That must be dealt with. Second, in the face of reduced ODA, one of the big opportunities that exists is tourism, both international tourism and domestic tourism. Because although it only employs 1% of the population as compared to 80% of the population involved in agriculture, they have almost equal value. So you get a massive multiplier by investing in tourism, and this can also help very much in the protection of the coastal areas, because otherwise the authorities do not have the funds to invest in that. So we have a mix of solutions, but I'm also hoping that the interventions like we had are looking at the bigger picture, looking at the system, so that the actions aggregate, and it's not just individual agencies implementing activities which at the end of the day leave nothing on the ground.
So maybe so it's completely right. When we talk about lands interaction, source to sea, there are many ways land-ocean interaction. So it's very complex because it was part of my research when I was doing my PhD, understanding from where those dynamics start. Sometimes they are starting far inland. And it's difficult then to acquire the right area where then doing the analysis and understanding how this thing is working. At the same time, for example, with our research group and other two research groups in our university, we founded an elite center on aquatic nature-based solutions. So we work only, it's called Aqua MBS, and we are working only on nature-based solutions that they are on river, coastal areas, and sea. And we are not only watching about the adaptation part, but also on the mitigation, because most of the case, some of the nature-based solutions, they are also doing storaging of carbon emission. And we are doing that in different levels because we have also, by building this project with this elite center, we are also working with multi-actor laboratories. So we have the involvement of specific case studies in Denmark, but also we are involving stakeholders from around the world in order to create more knowledge on that and to understand how to use and how those type of aquatic nature-based solutions, they counteract activities, human anthropic activity that they are polluting or interacting with nature, even far inland. So I don't know if I was...
We still have a lot to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
We have work.
We have work. Okay. Well, I think we are almost at the end of the session. So I would like to thank the panelists for their contributions. But before we step out, we would like to share one more social media Mentimeter question with you. And we ask you to share your thoughts with us. What came to mind? Here you are. So what are your main takeaways of this session? So we know what work lies ahead of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to consider equity. That's a very good one. Huh? You have to move forward. You need to have the proper investment possibilities. It's hard to implement the solution, but it's possible. That's always a good takeaway. Yes, it's hard. We're facing a lot of challenges, but I think we have to start acting on it. Always involve the community. I see that one comes back a couple of times. And we need to share learnings and coordinate activities. And I think that is one of the reasons why we're also here today. Okay, thank you all. Tom, I give the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Remco. Thank you very much, our presenters and panel members. And thank you very much, the audience, with the questions. With this, we are going to close the session, and we hope to hear from you with your feedback. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.